Polish airspace was put on high alert early Wednesday morning, September 10th. And this time, it wasn't just about the war across the border. The Polish military's radars simultaneously tracked multiple unmanned aerial vehicles, triggering the command and control chain within seconds. Fighter jets took off. Ground-based air defense batteries took up firing positions, and airspace was gradually restricted. The Polish Air Force and NATO were on high alert. The Polish Armed Forces Operations Command confirmed that the country's airspace had been repeatedly violated by Russian Shahed-type UAVs. This Russian attack was a move that would trigger NATO's Article 5. Warsaw government officials argued that this was not a violation, but an act of aggression, directly targeting the safety of civilians. NATO jets shot down Russian drones that repeatedly violated Polish airspace during a nighttime bombing raid on Ukraine. Poland announced that 4 of the 19 drones that entered Russian airspace were shot down. While citizens were urged to stay indoors, fighter jets belonging to Poland, the Netherlands, and Italy took off to intercept more than 10 drones. Polish F-16 fighter jets, Dutch F-35s, Italian AWACS surveillance aircraft, and NATO shared aerial refueling aircraft participated in the operation, which lasted throughout the night. Polish Defense Minister Cezary Tomczyk stated that the Polish President and Prime Minister had been informed that an operation had been launched to neutralize the objects violating Polish airspace. Subsequently, official statements were made one after another that the Russian drones had been shot down and that a search was underway for the fallen wreckage. It was reported that the Russian unmanned aerial vehicles were approximately 40 kilometers deep inside Polish airspace before being shot down. Warnings were issued to the Polish public to stay indoors and report any falling debris. Warsaw government officials ordered approximately 8.7 million people, constituting about a quarter of Poland's population, to stay at home. This situation once again demonstrated that border violations are not just tired news, but a threshold with the risk of escalation. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced that they were in constant contact with the NATO Secretary General and that Allied forces had also been deployed. Donald Tusk said that an operation is underway regarding the multiple violations of Polish airspace. The army used weapons against the targets. I am in constant contact with the President and the Minister of Defense. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, the most serious conflict between Russia and the alliance has escalated the conflict to an unprecedented level. Poland, as a NATO member, is protected under Article 5. This was the first time NATO aircraft had been deployed against potential threats in Allied airspace, he said, adding that NATO Patriot air defense systems in the region detected the drones, but were not deployed. A spokesperson said the alliance would meet today to discuss how to respond. This failure was due, at least, to the fact that Russia's lethal drones did not cause any casualties in Poland. Had they not been shot down in an air defense operation involving F-35 jets from the Netherlands, the situation could have been different. For this reason, Donald Tusk called for the implementation of Article 4 of the NATO agreement in his speech to Parliament. Article 4 gives member states the authority to refer a matter to the main political decision-making body. Tusk said, "The downing of these unmanned aerial vehicles, which pose a security threat, changes the political situation." Therefore, Allied consultations took the form of a formal request to activate Article 4 of the NATO treaty. This paves the way for Article 5. NATO did not formally invoke Article 5, but it did effectively implement it. Allied capitals warned in joint statements that a repeat would come at a cost, with more severe consequences. US President Donald Trump said that, "We must impose sanctions that will bankrupt the Russian war machine and arm Ukraine with weapons capable of striking Russia." US Representative Joe Wilson said, "Russia is attacking NATO ally Poland with Iranian-made Shahed UAVs. This is an act of war. We are grateful for the swift response of NATO allies." These statements showed how NATO and Poland are cooperating against Russia's UAV attack attempt, and that Article 5 could be invoked at any moment. Along with the current moves being made here, we should also look at what could happen in a 72-hour response simulation of possible moves regarding Russia's UAV dispatch crisis against Poland. It was announced that Chelm and Zamość were among the cities under threat. After such a move, cap intensity would be increased and GBAD echelons redeployed within the first 12 hours. CAOC would intensify its plan to take over patrols from neighboring airspace and transition from tanker to tanker. This is indeed what happened. The most critical note from a military perspective was the first statement. Poland announced that it had neutralized the violating drones with its own and allied assets, and emphasized this point. Radars tracked more than 10 objects simultaneously, and those deemed a threat were directed for destruction. Troops on the ground established a security perimeter around potential crash sites and initiated a chain of custody for evidence. Air policing was integrated with air defense and operated in an aggressive manner during this incident. Allied fighter jets, directed by CAOC, established layered CAP combat air patrol rings in Polish airspace. Patriot and short-range systems went on standby for a possible second wave and debris risk. The AWACS and tanker duo extended their watch periods and maintained a higher resolution radar image. The initial response in Allied capitals to the crisis Russia created in Poland took the form of visible and rapid deterrence. Warplanes, early warning aircraft, and aerial refueling aircraft belonging to Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Poland were mobilized to defend Polish airspace against Russian drone attacks. Romania, Poland, and the Netherlands deployed F-16, F-35, and SAAB-340 AWACS warplanes. The sound of fighter jets continued to be heard in the skies over Lublin in eastern Poland. East of the border, the passive sensor network overlooking low-altitude corridors is being expanded. The electronic environment towards Belarus and Kaliningrad is constantly monitored, and anomalies are flagged. Civil air traffic is being diverted further north and west during risky windows. That day, several airports, including Warsaw Chopin, were temporarily closed, and planes were redirected to different airports within the country. In addition to Chopin Airport, the other three airports that were closed were Rzeszów Jasionka Airport, Warsaw Modlin Airport, and Lublin Airport, which are the main centers for supplying weapons to Ukraine. In addition, both air defense and ground-based air defense systems were simultaneously reinforced in Poland. Airspace surveillance flights, tanker aircraft escorts, and forward transport routes were reorganized. Restrictions were imposed on certain routes as a risk mitigation measure for civil aviation. While airports were temporarily closed, NATO's CAOC chain continued to manage QRA flights. At the land border, certain gates were closed and search and screening practices were stepped up. At the end of the first night, the cycle of wreckage and data collection and verification began. In Poland, local law enforcement units were involved in wreckage management, the chain of custody, and source identification. The public was informed in a clear and calm tone to reduce the burden of false reports. The surprise element was that the violation showed a recurring nature overnight. This recurrence weakened the accident thesis and strengthened the test thesis. Between 12 and 24 hours, official notes and Allied joint statements arrive via diplomatic channels. In the 24 to 72-hour window, if the incident recurs, the engagement threshold is raised. For this reason, the multi-zone alert signaled the geographical breadth of the operation. All of this was a vivid example of how the UAV era changed border security overnight. The electronic warfare front further complicated the tactical picture on the ground. GPS jamming reports could cause occasional deviations in civil aviation and land navigation. Poland therefore re-established civil routes during specific time windows. On the military side, inertial and multi-sensor fusion tracking algorithms mitigate the blackout effect. Electro-optical and passive sensor contributions are important for low-altitude, slow-moving targets. Allied AWACS play a critical role in separating the signal image from background noise. Jamming tires radar operators by producing false targets and reflection trails. Therefore, command centers tightened the verification chain and made the firing permission threshold explicit. The field application was an attempt to balance reducing false engagements while maintaining reaction time. The result was a high-tempo but controlled engagement behavior. In this simulation, the risk of false alarms and false engagements can never be eliminated. A complex electromagnetic environment, especially on busy nights, makes target discrimination difficult. Therefore, the rule of multiple sensors and multiple confirmations remains critical. Firing measured shots without compromising speed at the same time is a matter of training and discipline. On the other hand, Poland's engagement rules also kept in mind the tragic incident involving a missile from another country in 2022. That incident raised persistent questions about whose weapon it was, at what altitude, and what the threat conversion rate was. Therefore, today's scenario relied on radar EO double confirmation and the principle of striking away from civilians. For this reason, NATO frequently works on cross-border shadow target scenarios in joint exercises. Deconfliction protocols reduce the risk of accidents, especially in battery jet interactions. In the age of UAVs, low-cost threats continue to strain expensive defenses. In this equation of strain, logistics and maintenance tempo are also part of deterrence. In short, sustainability up to the right shot at the right time is also decisive. Thus, the deterrence threshold was reiterated without resorting to a formal invocation of Article 5. This warning window in Poland occurred 3 days after Russia launched an intense nighttime assault on western Ukraine. A record-breaking wave of over 800 UAVs and dozens of missiles targeting Kyiv had already shaped the remainder of the night. While Ukrainian sources reported fires affecting the government complex in the capital, sirens continued to sound in western provinces. Now, a real test was unfolding at Polish altitude. This critical situation marked one of the sharpest alarm moments for NATO air policing in the 2-year war. On the other side of the border, successive flashes on Poland's radar screen turned the air picture from grey to red. This pattern was seen as Moscow's tactic of testing NATO's threshold while putting pressure on Ukraine. The Ukrainian Air Force's initial sharing of the Zamość threat warning, then retracting it, increased the uncertainty of information. This also showed how fragile public communication can be on a night of active attack. Nevertheless, Poland's official stance remained clear. There was a violation, Poland and NATO intervened, and the border was secured. The Belarus layer was not a passive backdrop in this crisis, but an active line of tension. Due to the exercise schedule spreading across the region, Poland had previously announced that it would close its border with Belarus. This decision created a preventive barrier at the point where border security and hybrid pressure converged. The Belarusian territory is known for its low-altitude corridors, suitable for UAV flights and electronic jamming sources. It is known that large-scale exercise periods, such as Zapad, put pressure on civilian military traffic at the border. Different situations were observed in Belarus during Russia's UAV attacks on Poland. In addition to UAVs entering Polish airspace, the Belarusian Air Force was currently hunting down rogue Shaheds in its airspace. Poland and the Baltics increased their patrol and scanning intensity during the same time window. Logistics and migration issues created complementary pressure that reinforced the security card. Guidance documents for civilians were delivered to local authorities, along with a CLED-style incident maps. Thus, the airspace alert and land border measures became two sides of the same scenario. The result was that the picture became more fluid when the Belarus variable was added. From Russia's perspective, there is no single answer to the question of what this pattern of behavior, i.e. sending UAVs to Poland, signifies. One interpretation is that it is a test of NATO's reaction time and political unity. Another interpretation is to pin NATO to the defense line during high-intensity nights against Ukraine. In both interpretations, the goal may be to multiply decision moments and increase the possibility of error. The way to counter this is to shorten the reaction time without compromising the quality of verification. Allies therefore use joint training, joint communication, and a common legal language. Energy sanctions and secondary sanctions are being prepared as the economic arm of the military message. When these legs walk in unison, the payoff of the testing game decreases. This is how the border can cease to be a testing ground. The gain is deterrence without the need to fire a shot. The Eastern European equation is being redrawn with sharper lines after this incident. Finland and the Baltics are thickening the air-land sensor network from north to south. The Suwalki corridor is gaining a constant patrol rhythm from the air and on the ground. Within Poland, permanent site plans for air defense installations are accelerating. The civilian-military distinction is being clarified along the Rzeszów line, which is close to Ukrainian logistics. Passive protection and fire prevention measures are being enhanced at railway and highway junctions. The emergency production capacity of local industry is being integrated into defense plans. These steps point to a permanent border security architecture, not a one-night affair. The consequences of this crisis are not calm on the Western Front, but a systematic state of alert, and this order is accepted as the new normal in the age of UAVs. The crisis created by Russia in Polish airspace and its simultaneity with the Ukrainian front should never be forgotten. When Russia increases the intensity of its attacks towards the west, sirens sound in the Lviv-Volyn window. This pressure automatically increases the pace of air policing at the NATO border. The sharing of Ukraine's air defense and Poland's air picture is therefore critical. The security of the logistics flow is not just a matter for one country, but for the supply chain. When drones are shot down, debris and wreckage can sometimes fall on the other side of the border. This technical detail can trigger discussions about sovereignty and jurisdiction. Therefore, joint incident site management and evidence protocols are being worked on. To remain calm in the field, pre-written texts are needed at the table. Crisis management depends as much on the quality of preparation as on the accuracy of communication. As we approach the final stages, let's put the possible outcomes that could occur in the coming period on the table. The first scenario is a non-recurring violation and dampening with a strong message. In this case, the Allies settle for a package of sanctions and military visibility. The second scenario is repeated violations and earlier engagement. Here, CAP-GBAD thresholds are lowered and the shootdown cycle accelerates. The third scenario is Belarusian involvement and simultaneous pressure. Joint pressure on the land-air border requires multiple tasks on NATO's eastern flank. The fourth scenario involves accidental escalation and an emergency de-escalation line. At this stage, diplomatic channels and leader-level telephone diplomacy come into play. What remains constant in all scenarios is the meticulous maintenance of the confirm, engage, verify chain. Considering all that has happened, the few minutes of violation in Polish airspace rewrote NATO's entire night. Every step, from the rapid takeoff of jets to the closure of airports, carried a message. The message was addressed to Moscow, but the recipient was the entire alliance. It was said that this test game is expensive and will become even more so. Even in moments of intense uncertainty, the line of law and discipline was not crossed. The line between staying alert and not escalating is delicate, but it can be maintained. The key to this is the simultaneous operation of training, sensor fusion, and a common language. In Eastern Europe, this line now seems to be part of everyday life. A lesson learned overnight can produce a reflex that will be useful for years to come. And that reflex is called hearing the voice of the border instantly and giving the right response. Thank you for watching.